All right, guys, it's time for a new build. We've been working with a company that's not necessarily known as much for the street as they are for bashing, M2C Racing, and been working with them on a couple of new products, and we decided to do an M2C build. It's going to be a really basic build, so we can, something that just the average guy can do, with adding some, a few of their parts, and got a new part to introduce today that we're really excited about. We're going to start with just the Limitless. Got a fresh Limitless here. We'll probably do a GT, but I maybe even can do a open wheel car. The whole project can wrap around either one. So what we'll do is start and we'll just see where it goes. I did a GT body already, got it all painted up. Gonna paint up a open wheel body and maybe run the car both ways, because the way it's going to set up, it'll be good for either. And make it nice and simple, keep it to where it's still got the factory arms, factory diffs, just all the factory stuff. So it's something that just anybody can do. Most of the builds that we're doing now, most of the guys, we're doing full chassis with whatever company that you like, with a whole bunch of bling, and that's great and it works. I'm excited about those products as well, but this one I want to keep as stock as possible and just show what stock car can do. Keep the aluminum chassis. Most people don't know, but the couple of years ago when I ran that, I think it's probably been 3 years ago now, that 196 car was still this, it was as stock as this car is now. So you can do a lot with one of these as it is, with just adding a few things and not having to go crazy overboard and spend $3,000 or $4,000 building a car. I think some people would probably be surprised just how fast you can go with a relatively stock Limitless car. So what we're going to do is I'm going to build this thing and set it up. We're going to go through all the stuff that we can. I've done a lot of this before in an earlier video, but what I want to do is kind of go over it again. I've upgraded some of the things, let's say, that I do, because we all learn as we go. Everybody learns more stuff. You got to keep an open mind. A lot of people have some great ideas. So you just collectively collect all of that stuff together and build some really nice cars. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to do a whole new build again with some setup stuff that we do, that I do, and make this car go, but yet keep it it's close to stock. I mean, we're going to add some parts, obviously. I've got some carbon parts that M2C does now, towers, plates, got some side skirts, kind of show a little bit of this stuff, some nice side skirts. For the open wheel Limitless, of course, got some carbon side plates and some carbon, some dress up stuff, and it has some functionality, but it's it makes one look good, lightens it up a little bit. I don't really look at that as like a big deal. The carbon side skirts, you add those or take them away, so it makes it easy to be a GT or open wheel car. So some of the guys out there that just don't have the funds to build, 2, 3, 4, or like me, 30 plus speed run cars, can build a car that they can buy the car, buy some simple electronics, and make this thing go, and make it go fast. So that's what our goal is to do that, plus introduce some new products, and we got a few really good ones coming. I think some people are going to be happy with. These things they're built really well. Obviously, we've shown that over the last couple of years since these things came out. We went from running in the 150s was like a big deal, and now we're pushing for 230, maybe even more this season. We'll see how it goes. So let's start back with just a basic car and work our way up and build a nice car, build something really cool. Probably going to leave it in the stock configuration, because it's easy to set it up. You know, batteries, we're going to keep it simple, you know, just keep it as simple as possible. I think that's going to be the better way to go with this car. Plus, you know, we'll be able to do it, I don't want to say on the cheap, but cheaper than buying a carbon chassis and all the other stuff that goes along with doing that and building a custom car. Because I would say that there's a giant percentage of the market that just ain't gonna, you know, they just can't do that. And so that's what we want to do with this car, is keep it something that the average Joe can build and have fun with and go fast. Not only just be a stepping stool to move up to a faster car, but actually be his fast car. Because, you know, when I started with the Limitless, when they very first came out, you know, like I say, 150 was a screaming car. And the same car that I ran in the, you know, made my first 150 Limitless pass with, I still have. It is still an open wheel car. The second one that I built, aluminum chassis, went at the end of the season a few years ago, it was at 196. And then, of course, got carried away in building all the other cars that I have fun doing. That's why I have so many. I just get carried away and build them over and over. I like to build something different every time. I don't run the same motors in cars. I don't run, you know, obviously ESCs, we know where that's going to be. We always know what that's going to end up as currently. You know, tires, stuff like that. We're going to use that stuff anyway. But I like to use different motors, different configurations, different setups. Just try everything that's out there. And that's how you find out what really works for you. Because what necessarily works for me doesn't necessarily work for another guy. And what works for him doesn't necessarily work for me. This is just my... from my experience, what works the best. You know, we're gonna do this car. We'll probably run, this car will hold a 4070 in the V2 up front. So we'll probably put a 4070 in it. There's plenty of them out there that are more than capable of running some really nice speeds. And of course, you know, the XLX, the great part about this, the V2 setup, is it actually will fit in here with very little work to get it in there. I'll show you what I usually do just to get them into that stock tray. And there's plenty of batteries out there that'll fit in these trays as well. Obviously, some of the parts that I'll run outside of the M2C stuff, we all know about, and makes for a nice car. But we are going to keep this thing as, like I say, as on the cheap as possible. We're going to, you know, just some upgrades that guys would like to do, shock towers, and some side skirts. You know what everybody likes to do, but do it, just do the whole car in a more economical way and show just how fast it can be, even at that way. And I'll probably even do it, and I've done this a couple of times before, is leave the Limitless body mounts and put an infraction mount in, so I can actually run a GT body with very little changes over running an open wheel body. You know, if you're gonna run an open wheel, you take the front mount out and you put the body on. I mean, that's just all it. You take the front infraction wheel out and put the nose on, and you're ready to go. So it's, you know, it's pretty simple. So I think that's what we're going to do, is have it where you can run it either way, whichever way you like. And we're going to, like I say, show you some new products that that M2C and I have worked on, and very excited about it. A lot of things coming. So what I'm going to do is just go through just sections and steps, and we'll go into some detail. The video might drag out a little bit, but it'll be well worth it. And I get to introduce some new stuff. So y'all keep watching, check out the new things, and we'll get this car moving along. I'm gonna get the main part taken apart. I'll skip all the little things that doesn't really matter, as far as, you know, disassembling the ends, the front and rears, and just cut out some of the stuff that we all have seen in so many videos before now. But I will go back and reiterate some of the setup stuff that I've done in other videos so that it's all in one place, and we use this as a introduction to some new parts and as maybe a setup video. So I appreciate y'all watching. Let me get this thing took apart and we'll move on into this build. All right guys, let's talk about where we're at now. Got this thing turned around here. We're going to take these front shocks off. Now we're not going to take all of this off because I want to access the diff, but we're not replacing any of the arms. We're going to leave those stock. We're going to leave the knuckles stock. Everything else will be stock. We do have a carbon Arrma arm that we'll probably put in because M2C's making one of those, and a carbon top plate, so I can take that stuff off from the back and not have to disassemble everything. If I happen to skip over something that you have any questions about, you know, feel free to hit me up on Messenger or put it in the messages below. I look at every message, so we can be glad to help you out any way I can. Once I get all this front done, I will go over what I'm going to do to these shocks. I have gone over it before in some videos, but I wanted to go over it again. I ran the stock shocks for a very long time and still run them on most every car, and I just do some modifications to get them to the proper ride height that I like. I've said it a bunch of times, and I'm going to say it yet again: grub screws are not for setting ride height. That's just the wrong way to do it. I'll use limiters in the shocks and let the shocks control my ride height. What happens is we stiffen up these springs on these shocks really tight. Whether you use a stock spring or you use aftermarket springs, they're really stiff, and what happens is you got these pushing. You can see how much flex is just in the arms. So when you have that much flex, when you put that shock in there and you try to bind that up by using that grub screw to set your ride height, your arm does this. Over time, that arm is just going to curve, and you're gonna, oh sorry, hit that camera. It's going to curve, and you're going to have one drooping more than the other, and you're going to turn the screw to tighten it up some more, and basically it's just a waste of time. Obviously aluminum arms fix that flex problem, but again, we want to keep this car simple so anybody could build it. So we're going to stay with the plastic. Works great and everything, so it's not an issue with performance or anything else. It's always nice to have all those shiny goodies, but it's not absolutely necessary to make a car go fast. So anyway, we got them shocks off. I'm going to take a few other things off. We'll take this sway bar off, the cover, pull the axles, and pull this diff out, and I'll show you what we're gonna do to that. All right guys, sway bar, got everything loose. It's just got a little ball socket, snaps right out of the arm. Just get it out of the way, take this out. Then obviously you got the cap screws, and these caps can sometimes be pretty tight when they're new. And with the shocks off, it's really simple to get these things out. You know, it's just a matter of wiggling it just right. Get that out of there. Now we'll show you what we're going to do with these diffs also. We'll set that aside for the time being, because we're going to change out this front shock tower while we got this thing this far down. And also, while I've got this apart, I'll probably go ahead and put that carbon top plate in there just to do all this at one time, because it kind of ties together. And then we'll go back and start setting up those diffs and setting up those shocks and get this done. But as you see, I'm going to leave the biggest majority of this on the car, because we're keeping this simple, using some good stuff, and we're just upgrading a few things, you know, like the shock towers and the other stuff. It's just some small upgrades stuff that most guys would do anyway without going crazy with the rest of the car. All right guys, I got the front shock tower unbolted. Keep in mind you got 3 spacers in here, 2 thin ones and 1 thicker one. When you take these out, Arrma usually puts them all in the back, takes a little bit of caster out of the car. We'll probably put them in the front and kick a little caster in it, just to, it's excessive caster, but it does help a car run straight, so we're going to utilize it. This is pretty simple. We'll take these shock mounts off, put them on the carbon tower, and like I say, while we got this thing right here, I'm going to take this out and we're going to pull this top plate off, and I'll go ahead and put that carbon plate from M2C in there as well, and we will start building some of this thing back together and move it along. It's going to move along pretty quickly. We don't have to make a really long video to do all these little things, because we're going to do the same thing to the back as we're doing to the front, and it'll go pretty quick. We'll get a lot of this done in just a very few minutes, because I'm skipping all the stuff. Like I say, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. I like to help anybody I can, and we'll just move along. Y'all keep watching, guys. All right guys, this top plate is really pretty simple. It's just a couple of screws here, a couple screws here, and of course you got that brace screw right there. When you're at this point, it just flops right out. Have 1 screw on the bottom. We'll take this off and add this stuff to the new carbon plate. And while we're here, we got plenty of nice access to that Arrma arm, and we'll go ahead and put that carbon Arrma arm in. Comes in the kit with the shock towers. Let me pull this over here where you can see that. Got the top plate, front shock tower, rear shock tower, and that Arrma arm in carbon. So we're going to use this. I'm going to use everything on this car. So we'll get this Arrma arm switched out, and then we can start putting this thing back together. And we'll talk about some of the other stuff as we move back on this thing. While we're putting that top plate on, finishing up the steering, actually got some arms, carbon fiber arms for the steering knuckles. Go ahead and get that on too. And we're getting close to having all this carbon on the front. Shouldn't take much longer at all. Just a few screws here, get the arms back in place, and then we'll work on this diff and work on those shocks. It's coming along pretty good. All right, we got this shock tower in place, putting these upper control arms back in. Again, we got the shims. We're going to just leave those out for a little bit till we get ready to do the setup. I'm just gonna bring these in enough to hold it all in place, and we'll put those shims in and finish tightening everything up as we get a little bit farther along. So currently we've got the carbon top plate, the shock tower, the Arrma arm, the arms, the knuckle arms, so steering knuckles, plates, and I've got to switch over the upper shock mounts. We'll get them on there, and then we will move to the next thing. So y'all keep watching. Guys, finishing up on these upper shock mounts. I did move the upper shock mounts. I'll show you on this one. Here's where they come out from the factory. I moved them up here. It actually moves them out some and up some, which will be fine for the body that we're going to use, and it also will lessen the angle that the shocks are at, which will increase their force. Their compression force with the springs will increase the straighter you make them. So we're gonna bringing that out and bringing it up, so it's going to give it a little less length, so we won't have to deal with as much length, and it'll strengthen up that that compression a little bit. And you know, we're going to have a good bit of strengthen that front end, because you know the body that we'll use has a lot of downforce on the front, so she's going to push down pretty hard on the front, which is what we want, keep the car from flipping over. And we'll get all that set up. You know, we're kind of moving on now to where we're going to do the diff. So I'm going to get a couple of things set together, and I will show you what I want to do with the diff. It's nothing major, it's just a doping change. Get it changed and get it back in, and then we'll work on the shocks. All right guys, this diff's been draining for quite some time, so it's nice and dry. There's hardly anything at all in there, just a skim over some of the gears, and that's plenty good enough. When you fill this thing up to proper level, and like I say, I'm going to use some 500K in this thing. When you fill it up and get it all put together, it's going to be just perfect. That's what I like anyway. Everybody has their own thing, you know. That's what I like to do, so that's what I'm going to stick with. What I'm going to do is get this thing full, set it aside, and we'll start working on some shocks and keep this thing moving, because this is going to need to set a little while. There's a couple of ways that that you can do this. You can just fill it up and let it settle. Another way that I do them on in some situations, or in some cases, is take out the spider gears. Just take them out, and fill the cup up about halfway, and just set the spider gears in and let them sink back down into it. You won't have any air bubbles that way, very few, and it makes it, you know, just an easy job. You know, these things come right out. So we'll take those out. I'm going to fill this thing up about halfway, and then I'll slide those spider gears back in, and I'll just set them back in there and just let them sink in and set this thing aside. That'll help push any air out, and it'll get it nice and full. And then we will start on some shocks. As you can see, what I did, like I say, fill this thing up halfway and just drop those spider gears back in to let them settle in. Of course, make sure your pin and all's lined up, but they'll just kind of sink down in there, and it'll help push that air out just nice and easy. Makes it really simple. Let that thing sit over to the side, and let's talk about these shocks a little bit. Started getting this one disassembled. Of course, took the spring off, and then we'll get the end off as well. Get it out of the way. I use these are smooth jaw Kimpex pliers. They won't mar up the shaft. You can hold it just strong enough to turn it. And of course, you're gonna have to empty out what fluid is in here currently. That sounds great, doesn't it? Set this over here. All right, guys. All right, now let's set this down and let it drain a bit, and I'll show you what I do with that. All right, guys. Let me show you these things here. These little nylon washers. And that's exactly what they are. You can see that number on there. You can get them at any hobby shop. I'm sure you can order them if you want. They work really well. I've been doing my shocks this way for a long time. Put it on the shock shaft. Depending on the car, it could be one, it could be two. To lower it, because what it does is restricts how far this can go in. So essentially you're shortening up the shock. And I found that this is the best way to lower the front of the car and not use grub screws. Again, that's just not a good idea. We're going to use the stock springs on this car. So one thing we will do, in addition to putting the 2 spacers in here, some cars you can get away with 1. It really depends on your road. This is the way I look at ride height on the front of the car. Run the car as low as your road will allow. I'm pretty fortunate that the runway we go run at, I can actually run a car about 5 mils off the front, and running it that low, it's just going to lessen the air pressure underneath, a little bit less air going under there, a little less chance of blowovers. Fortunately, this past year we had very few of those. And what I mean by I'm also going to limit the downward travel of the shock. Like I say, I'm using stock springs, so I'm going to get a little bit of that. We're going to put a piece of fuel tubing on here as a bumper. It's a bump stop, and that will just stop that shock from going down any further than it needs to. Try to get it to where it stops, right at the road, so it's not digging into the road when you're heavy on the braking. So I'm going to get a couple of these things cut for these shocks, and then we'll put it back together. All right, guys, I got that fuel tubing on there, and I took care to cut them both at the same length. They're the bump stop on the outside would be actually just depending upon how your road is. If you're running the car really, really low, really tight to the road, then obviously you're going to run a little bit more bump stop, just so that it doesn't squat or dive in the front so much when you heavy on the brakes. And then what I do, I usually just hold the nut on the inside. I usually have a socket, but for some reason I did not bring that to the bench. So I just hold the nut on the inside and turn my end back in. So you're just turning all that in. It just makes it easier, because trying to put this on with that fuel tubing can be kind of tricky. It can be done, but it is tricky. And so you still have a shock. I don't know if you can tell, it still has movement, but you're using that bump stop. It's also working so that bump stop is working kind of like an elastomer as well. So it's actually still working. It stiffens up the shock quite a bit, but my road is really smooth. So I can run a little bit stiffer shock and control the movement in the suspension a little better. There's a lot of ways to do that, but like I say, I want to run as close to stock as I can with this car. So we're going to run those stock springs, and this is the way to do it. This is the way we did it before anybody had any real heavy springs out. And it works great. I still like to use it in a lot of cars. So that's how we're going to do these. Now, as far as weight of shock oil goes, you see that this thing is moving a couple of millimeters. It is really not going to make a big difference at all if you run 30 cast, 35 cast, 37 cast. It's really not going to make a difference. You're moving this thing this much. There is next to no oil movement happening or piston movement to create any dampening. We're just stiffening this whole thing up. And this is the easiest way. If you put a real heavy spring on here, it does the same thing, because you're not going to get as much movement. So you're basically doing the same thing, just a different way. I happen to have some 37, so that's what I'm going to put in it. And it'll work just fine, because it's really just going to be in there for that very tiny bit of movement that it will have. And you'll see with running the plastic arms, the suspension is going to have a lot more movement than you think, because the shock on here, when it's in place, this thing's going to still have more than enough to suck up the small stuff in the road. And it'll work just fine this way. So I'm going to put some 37 that I happen to have on the bench in here, and that'll complete this shock, move on to the other one, and get this thing back together while that doping in that diff is finishing. We'll let it set as long as we can and put it back together, and then we'll have this front end together, and then we'll move on and talk about the rest of the car. All right, let me show you the difference here. This is the shock I just did. This is the factory shock with its factory size and length. And you can see, if I can get them nice and straight together, that's how much difference, as you can see, right about right there. We've lowered that front quite a bit. That's going to drop the front of this car, put it down where we want it to be. I say I've done so many of them that I just happen to know how many we need to put in, but that's you see this shock has a lot of movement. One, it's going to let the car rise up too much, and then you're going to have blowovers. If the car has to pick up the weight of the front, then it's going to kind of keep that, it'll help keep that front down. So we'll get this other shock done, and then we'll have the shocks done, and we'll go from there. All right, we got those shocks done. Got them both set up the same now, so they're back to the same length. So they're ready to go back in the car as soon as we get everything all set up. We get them done and back in there. Now we got this diff. Like I said, what I did was I filled it about halfway without the spider gears and just set the spider gears in. Soaks in nice, sets down good. Then we'll put this thing back together. When you fill these up, you want to take care not to fill the little screw holes full of doping, because if you do, when you go to put your screws in, you start tightening them screws up, what you're going to end up with is you're going to crack the case on the side, because you're going to pack all that down in there. It's just going to pop the case, and that's not good at all. And what I usually do is I actually will make sure I keep this in the camera. Sorry guys. I like to start all my screws just a little, and that way, if you have it overfilled and it starts pushing out, if you start 1 or 2 screws at a time and you tighten them down, when it pushes out, it's going to fill that hole up, and you're going to have that problem. But if you take and start all the screws, then if it does have some smush out in it, then it'll be out the side and not through into the screw holes. Now I'm just running these down so I don't have to stand there and twist each one of them all the way down. I'm just going to run them down till they touch, and then I'll do my final tightening with a hand tool. Obviously you do not want to do that with a, we'll get these tightened in. This thing will be ready to go back in. That was a little looser. Just check them all good. Just tighten them up any kind of like cross pattern, whatever there. And now that we still have the shocks out of the way, so we can actually be able to get this thing back in, these flats right here will clear this shock tower, if you turn them toward that, a lot easier to get it in that way. And of course you got a couple of shims on some of these. Some have shims, some don't. You know, check them, make sure if you need them, you need to install them. I checked this one before I started, and it was really nice. It didn't have just a very slight bit of play, so it's in a good spot. Now, it hadn't been run in yet, so we will go back and check that at a later time and make sure that it's good. Now, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put this cap back on and get these shocks on, and we will be basically done with the front, other than changing the cup out, but we'll talk about that as we move on. All right, we're getting this thing back together now. Getting this last shock bolted up, and let's talk about a few things. This is, as you can see, still got the flex in the suspension. It might be hard to see on the camera. So it's got some movement in the suspension. Now that the shocks are shorter, and I raised them up and brought them out, then when we put this thing down, get the front end back on, it's going to decrease that ride height, but we're not using any grub screws. Because like I say, now, because you have to stiffen this up with springs or something. You got to do something here to strengthen up the suspension. So when you go in through here and you start turning that grub screw, trying to lower this car, all you're doing is bending the plastic arm. Now, obviously, if you had aluminum arms, that wouldn't be the issue. But even with aluminum arms, using grub screws to set ride height is just, it's unnecessary. It's not the best way to do it. I'm sure everybody has an opinion. I'm just telling you mine, and hopefully it helps some of you. Sway bar. If the suspension on a car is set up correctly, we're running straight lines, and we should not. I don't even like sway bars on my cars. I put this one back on because it's laying here, and I don't want to spend the time to take all the little pieces off. As stiff as this front end is, that sway bar is not going to do anything. If I was running a road course, something that I'm turning, then yeah, I would run the sway bar and use it and adjust it. It even has tensioners on here, which none of that's really going to do a whole lot of anything. If you have a car that's running so hard that you get in body roll on, and with the suspension like we got, there's other issues that you need to attend to. It's not, these little sway bars aren't going to help anything. They look good. They function for road stuff, bashing whatever, but for straight line speed runs, that's just, it's not needed. All right, now we got all that done. That's the front of the car. Now the back of the car, we're going to talk about it, but I'm not going to go through all the details and as far as taking it apart and doing the diff and all that on camera, because it just takes a lot of time, and I know this video has gotten crazy long already. On the rear, I run the rear of my car at full factory height, meaning as far, the arms are only going to go down so far before they start hitting on the inside. So they're down all the way. The car's at its height. So I get the rake that I want in the car. And then I'll cut my body sides accordingly how I want them to be. Rear shocks, what I'm going to do, I'm not going to put limiters in the shocks because I'm not lowering the back of the car. What I'm going to do on the back is I'm actually going to do the same bump stop spring tubing. You know, it'll run the stock spring, and instead of having all of this, I'll have this tensioned up, and I'll have a bump stop in there in the rear shock, so it'll have movement, but it won't have squat. You don't want a lot of squat because, you know, if the car squats in the back, it raises in the front, and it does not take much at all before the car's it's going to fly. And when you start getting cars in the upper speeds, you're definitely not going to want to have that problem. So got a couple little things to get ready, and then we're going to talk about something new finally. We got that front done. We've talked about the back. We know that we're doing the same things other than no spacers in the shocks and we're going to put limiters on the back, run it at full factory height. Now at the end, when we get all this set up, we'll set it up and I'll show you what I'm going to do with, you know, as far as ride height adjustment, make sure it's all the way we want to do it. I have had to take shocks back off and add or subtract shims. I've had to shorten them, or you know, decrease the thickness of the shims. You have all kinds of situations, different bodies. You know, the Limitless is a little longer in the front, so it sits a little bit different because the farther you go out, the farther you go down. So depending on how you're running. But anyway, we're gonna get a couple things ready, take this center out, and I'm gonna show you something new. Finally, you get to see something new in this. Something you hadn't seen before. Obviously, we've seen carbon towers, which we got. We had the knuckle steering arms. We got the Arrma arm. Got everything in there. So we're going to take this out in the middle and show you something new, guys. All right, guys, we got that center out. Got the diff out, axles out, our center shafts, and the motor mount. Now I want to talk about something that's new from M2C. We got a new motor mount. It's a really nice motor mount. There's some features to this that I want to explain. It's brand new. This is the base kit for the single motor. It actually comes with a motor support as well, but we have everything in here. You got two slides, a 30 and a 25. All the hardware that you need to mount to put it together. And for single motors, this could, you know, as a basher, maybe buy just this particular pack. Also have, this is the basher top plate. So it has provisions for the cage, you know, in the crate and whatnot. Top plate for a speed guys. Doesn't have all that. And then there is actually another top plate that has the provisions for the infraction diff brake. So it's got that e-brake attachment. And then of course, you got your tower, your battery or bearing support. And these are the bearing stops, they're T's. And we'll show how all this goes together here shortly. Let me start putting this thing together. Like I say, this is going to be a single motor car. So we're doing the single mount. But with that said, you know, guys, oh, sorry, hit that camera. Y'all keep watching because there's going to be a duel. We're going to have that coming out real soon. We'll talk about it more, and I think when you see how this works, you'll maybe see what the benefit of that deal is going to be. Let me get this put together, and we'll start talking about it. I'll get it mounted up. And, you know, I've still got to decide on my center shafts. Haven't made a decision on how we're going to go or what I'm going to use for all that. Obviously, it's going to be something good. And but let me get this motor mount put together and show you a little bit about this new motor mount. All right, guys, I got this new motor mount installed. I put the stock spool back in for now, just so we can talk about this thing some more. 25 millimeter slide. There's a 30 millimeter slide, like I say, that comes with that. Also, a basher top is you know, you can add it to the kit, the basic kit. You'll have that, you can add that top for that basher so that you have the cage mounts. And there's also one for the infraction e-brake. I know I'm repeating some of this, just want to get it all in there. Has a huge amount of adjustment. It actually has 3 screw holes. I got it in the middle, so you're here, which will carry you all the way to the inside. But if for some reason you're running something that's just outrageous, you still have a lot It'll hold just about anything that I could possibly imagine or put in it. I should have took these off. But the one thing that's got me excited about this mount is the adjuster. Because, you know, we've always had, and we've used just the top screws so we can adjust it and set it just right. And, you know, and on the single motor, that works fine. But now we have an adjuster that's going to sit down in here. It's got provision for one screw for the slide. It snaps on. This is how you adjust it. So you got real fine adjustment. It's gonna stay. You set your mesh, and all you have to do is go in here and tighten up that one screw. Now your mesh is locked in while everything's holding it, so it's not when you tighten that screw it's moving around. And then the adjuster's off. Depending on what you're running, you can go ahead and add your other screw if you just want to. If you have enough room, you can have all three in there. So it's got plenty of strength. So you got three, and this just depends on where your adjustment ends up. Again, let's go over it one more time just so you know. Movement, and I'm just going to move the slide to fit the adjuster tool. So the adjuster tool is on. Whatever adjustment that you want to make. And then lock down the slide. Take the adjuster off and add your screws. So what you have is an adjustment that's when you, I know I'm kind of dragging this out, I'm not trying to. So you have that fine adjustment that we have that we like, where we can move this thing slightly and get that adjustment just right on that mesh. And then we tighten this down. If you think about how much this is going to mean on the dual, you'll understand why I'm so excited about this thing. This is locked into place. So what do you think it's going to be for the other side? I can't wait to show you all of that. But just wanted to show you, this is the new mount, M2C. They're going to be up for sale soon. Don't forget that there's going to be a dual. We're looking forward to showing that one a little more and showing you what that benefit of that adjuster is going to be. But so we got the motor mount in it. Like I said, haven't decided on the shafts yet, so I'm not going to lock that spool in or anything. Super smooth. I did want to show you one more thing that was for this motor mount. These two little small grub screws. What they're made for is you can actually run them down in here and just let them touch the race. And then another one is to put on top of it to jam that up so that they lock in. If you needed a touch screw for a bearing, some bearings are not that precise. So if you have one of those bearings and it's trying to spin in there, you just touch that race just enough to take a little bit out. For us, I think we're going to be really good to go, but everything looks great. So now that we got the front end together, we got the motor mount in, that new M2C motor mount. We're going to finish up the back, get the shaft situation squared away, and then in the next video, I'm going to install electronics and get the ride height set and everything done. This video is like way longer than I expected, but I wanted to kind of get as much detail as I could into this build to make this the new go-to build video. I've done a couple some people have asked some questions, so I've tried to add that stuff to this build video so that people have something to reference and be able to see what we're doing. Again, lastly, on this video, M2C build, we're going to keep it as simple as possible. Yes, we're upgrading, just some carbon parts that M2C now offers for the street. Super excited about the new mount. It's going to work for the bashers, the 6S bashers, with that top plate, the infraction with the e-brake, and the Limitless with just a flat plate. So it is ready for everything. And that adjuster works on all of it. So that's going to be a big, I think that's going to be a big thing. Super easy to deal with. And I'll show you more about that and the benefits of that when we bring out the dual, maybe next week, maybe the week after. I'm not sure yet, but all this stuff's coming. We got a little bit more to do on the car. Do the shocks in the rear. We got carbon side plates to do for the GT. We'll get those front and rears back on here. And then I will show you what I'd like to set my car up for the ride height and everything else. I hope you enjoyed part one of this. We're going to do it in two parts, obviously. I'm sorry it's drug out so long. Just trying to get that detail in. And we'll show you the new M2C body. Got it finished up today. We'll show that in that next video. And y'all keep watching. Hope I passed on some good information for you. We'll see what electronics we're going to put in here. And we'll get this thing ready to go to the airfield soon. Weather's going to roll up on us before we know it. And we'll be back out there running, guys. Thanks for watching. Watch for part 2.